Support for this program made possible by Parker Poe, legal counsel providing clear, solid direction locally, regionally, or wherever our clients' needs take us. ParkerPoe.com. South Carolina Bank and Trust, named in Forbes magazine as one of the 100 most trustworthy companies in America, SCBT has been serving the financial needs of South Carolinians for more than 75 years. SC Biz. In addition to SC Biz magazine, SC Biz News publishes the Charleston Regional Business Journal, the Columbia Regional Business Report, and GSA Business, fulfilling the mission of SC Biz News as South Carolina's media partner for economic growth. And by the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, a unified voice for business and industry and catalyst for increasing per capita income and enhancing the state's global competitiveness.
The pitch around issues such as the current economy, the historic federal stimulus package, health care, workforce development, executive compensation, comprehensive tax reform, economic development, education, and the list goes on, continues to be poignant, and quite often these days it's painful. The gap between how these issues are reported and how these problems truly exist is dramatic and sometimes confusing. Welcome again to the most widely watched source for Carolina business and industry for almost 20 years. I'm Chris William, and on this very special edition of CBR, we will hear directly from leadership in the Palmetto State, and at the same time bring together a critical mass of others who drive opinion and influence dialogue in our communities. So, over the next hour, please stay tuned for a non-inflammatory, intelligent, fact-based approach to open dialogue on the most current and acute challenges facing South Carolina.
This is the Carolina Business Review 2009 Carolina Business and Economic Summit. On this program, Darla Moore of Rainwater, Inc., Harris DeLoach of Sunoco Products Company, William Timmerman of Scana Corporation, and Ed Sellers of Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina. And now, from the studios of South Carolina ETV in Columbia, your moderator, Chris Williams.
Hello and welcome to this special summit of the studios of ETV in Columbia. Lady, gentlemen, thank you for being here. Let's just get right into it. Darla, when you look across the state, when you look across the Southeast, it is vibrant. People feel good about things, but this economy, like a lot of things, has taken some of the air out of the balloon. South Carolina, where it is right now, looking at the major economic indicators, the business indicators, how people just feel, what do you think the state and us as a whole need to be doing now to take advantage of the upturn that's coming? What would you do? What would you suggest?
Well, I would first argue with your premise, the upturn that is coming. I don't know that I would agree with that in the first instance. What I see more is this is one of the greatest challenges of our lifetime now, economically of our lifetime. South Carolina, we're stabilizing at about an 11.5% unemployment rate. Our tax revenues are off 25+%. I would say that we need to first assess genuinely where we are. We have lost 105,000 jobs in South Carolina in the last couple of years. The recovery, in my view, is not going to be a rapid one. The last recession we had was in 2001. That recession lasted about 9 months. We were at about a 5.8% unemployment at that time, and it took 5 to 7 years for us to get back to where we were in 2001. So to go from 11.5% unemployment downward, that is going to take a tremendous economic engine. So I think we've got some very, very serious questions and issues to face. Not to be negative, but to be realistic.
Well, and a good launching platform. Harris, clearly we know, at least to this date, we know the magnitude of what's happened in the economy, of our business. But Darla makes the point about, do we know the duration of it? Do you think that we do have a recovery, an upturn coming, and when is it going to happen, in your opinion?
Chris, as you know, Sunoco is probably the most diversified packaging company in the world in terms of the markets we serve and the geographies we serve. And we clearly have seen an upturn starting in about May or June of this year. It's been a gradual upturn, but we have seen an upturn whether we're in the U.S., Europe, Asia, or South America. I agree with Darla. The depth of this downturn is something that we haven't seen, at least in my lifetime, and it's going to take us some time to work out of this. I think 2010 we will hopefully continue to see an movement up. I think it's going to be 2012 or 13 before we overcome some of the job losses at the earliest that we've had.
Bill, weighed in on this. What do you think? Let me come back to the original question. What should the state be doing now?
Well, I think two things. One, I think we ought to take a moment and really celebrate the dickens out of Boeing coming to South Carolina. It really represents a huge investment by outsiders in our state, and I think validates a lot of the things that this state has stood for over the years in terms of industrial recruitment and in terms of job creation. So we've got a success now. We need to learn from that success. I've had the privilege of fishing with some of the people in this room, and I can promise you every time we catch a big one, we don't take 10 years off and then go try it again. We get right back to it, and we need to take a minute, be happy, really think about what we've done, but then let's go find us some more and get busy.
Ed, you're up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that we have to do actually lies in our attitudes, not specific things. This next period of time, Darla laid out 5, it could be even longer than that. It's not about what we normally do, which is look inside and figure we've got an answer. I think the only way we win this thing is we beat people. And we have to look outside and do about 100 things better than North Carolina, better than Oklahoma, better than Nebraska, better than Ohio. And it's that attitudinal thing of looking out, testing ourselves against what other people do, and then beating them at it in very focused ways. I don't think that's ingrained in our attitude about how we manage our economy here. If we can get that done, then we will, whatever winning is over the next 4 to 5 years, and it may not be very pretty, but we will do better than others if we take that approach to doing it and getting it done.
Darla, let me come back to something, because you made mention of the high unemployment rate. Clearly it's painful. Would you expect, you know, so many times in the media and on programs like this, and even at cocktail parties, we talk about jobs. Is it about jobs? Is that what it's about? If we fix that unemployment rate, then everything else is going to follow?
Well, if you want an economically vibrant state, the only way you get there is through a workforce, and a qualified, competitive workforce that can command good salaries. Good salaries. If I could go back to the thing you said earlier and respond to Harris's comment about what's happening at Sunoco, what Harris said and what Bill said are outstanding examples of what should be going on in South Carolina. All right, Harris says he's had an upturn. He's seen an upturn in his business. He also prefaced it by saying, we are probably the most diversified packaging company in the world. Therein lies his success. Harris and Sunoco are a unique company to this state. They're innovative, they're creative, they're global, they're outward focused, they've got good attitudes, they're profit motives. It's diversified. It is a perfect example of a company born in South Carolina, raised, bred, developed, and creating wealth in South Carolina. Sunoco creates wealth for South Carolinians, okay? If I may just say that. It's a very strong point, I think, for people to understand what it is we're striving for. If we want to be economically vibrant, we need to focus on companies with the Sunoco paradigm. Born here, grown here, bred here, innovated here, That will raise our economy.
Harris, since we're talking about Sunoco and talking about the corpus of the company, Bill talked about the Boeing issue. When you heard about the Boeing issue, when you knew it was coming or knew that there was a good chance South Carolina might land this business, what did you think? Did you think, yeah, this is a great deal because of jobs, yeah, this is a good deal because it's a manufacturing, or yeah, all of a sudden our attitudes are going to change a little bit back toward the positive?
Chris, I think it was a great day for South Carolina. But I agree with Bill completely. We can't rest on those laurels. I mean, but for some real union issues in Washington State, but for a program that is struggling with Boeing because they've got to get planes out the door, we probably wouldn't have had that opportunity. But to duplicate what we did at Boeing, we've got to have leadership driving it. We've got to have an educated workforce. We've got to do a lot of things, as Ed says, and pull them together to create the next Boeing and the next opportunity for this state. I'm going to carry on just a second your question of what should we be doing in this time frame. I'm not sure what the state ought to be doing, but I can tell you that I'm sure that Bill Timmerman and Ed, and I can tell you that Sunoco takes times like these to make hard decisions that make the business a lot more profitable when the business does turn around, when the economy turns around. And we've all had to take steps to make our business a lot more profitable. And I think that in this opportunity, there are things that the state need to be doing around comprehensive tax reform, deciding what we are going to fund and make sure we have the money to do it, to make certain that we're ready when this economy does turn around, the opportunities are there to grow this state and go forward.
Okay, Bill, I know you wanted to comment on something, but let me stay with you in just a second here, Harris, because you said something, going back to the original question about what we need to be doing now and what Sunoco did, and I'm not asking proprietary information, but give us an example of a hard decision you had to make.
Well, it's a hard decision when you decide that you have to shut down 14 plants because they're not going to be necessary when you come out of this economy and you take 200 or 300 jobs out. Those are painful decisions that you have to make, but you have to make them for the remaining 18,000 people to be a vibrant company. You have to make it for your shareholders. You have to make it for the communities that you live in. And I think the state has to do the same thing. We have to live within our means and create a revenue stream that will allow us to educate our children and recruit industry to this state.
Bill?
Well, kind of following on, I mean, we are, along with Santee Cooper, working hard to be sure there's always plenty of non-carbon emitting energy available for industries who want to relocate here, because I think that'll be a key element in the future. So the tough decision for us is Wall Street shutting down, the economy is dropping like a rock, and we signed a contract to build 2 nuclear plants to have online in 2016 and 2019. So you know, we're all about thinking about the future, and I think there are parallels where maybe the state needs to do some longer range planning to address some of the issues about revenue, a stable revenue flow for the state, one that addresses the major issues we need to get to. It's not for necessarily lack of knowledge, but we need to take this moment, and all of us need to get galvanized and get on team together, and go back to the way we used to all be on team together and had an agenda that was focused and everybody owned a piece of.
So Ed, when everyone's making money and it's easy to be singing from the same page in the hymnal, how, as Bill said, how do you get everyone looking in the same direction, pulling in the same direction, and seeing the same vision? How do you do that? Well,
the Rahm Emanuel is famous for saying, never waste a good crisis. I think your question about the jobs is actually starting at the back end of the question. I mean, every single mayor, every governor is sitting around right now saying, I need to create jobs to fill back in this hole that we just dug ourselves into with the economy. The issue is how that happens. It's not the outcome. New jobs are created because you did about 100 things 3 or 4 years ago to make them happen. And Boeing happened because stuff started, Boeing started with Bob Faith getting Voight here. I mean, that was a 6-year process to make that happen. If Bob Faith hadn't done what he did, Joe Taylor couldn't have pulled off what he did. And it's that hard intellectual work to drive what makes the jobs pop out the back end. Workforce education. We get gobs of money, Darla may actually know the money, flowing in here for workforce development. It spreads on our state like water on a beach. It just disappears into multiple organizations not coordinated on a focused agenda for that. That's one. Tax policy. Do those things now, the jobs follow later. And that's what we haven't done. That's what Bill just said between the lines. We haven't done the hard work of a comprehensive plan to create long-term economic success in South Carolina. And that's the issue.
Any questions in the audience? If, for those of you joining us from home, we have an interactive crew here, even though you can't tell right away. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand. We'll do our best. Darla, you have a question over here?
Yes,
hold on just a second, Pat. I'm going to get over there in a second. But I want to, Darla, while I'm walking over there, and Pat, if you please, will walk around here to this side. Education. When the economy gets bad, it seems like education initiatives are tabled. And it seems like that's precisely the time that we need to be leaning into either workforce development or education, the holistic, the whole piece. How do you feel about that? Where do we miss an opportunity in education right now?
Pretty much across the board. If you look how we've handled, step back and how we've handled our tax policy over the last several years, we pretty much put a nail in education coffin in South Carolina because of Act 388. Now, there were some issues with property values and what people were having to pay, and there was a problem. There was definitely a problem that needed to be addressed. But the way in which it was addressed in South Carolina could not have been more devastating in terms of the stability of the finances for South Carolina, as well as the underlying support of education from having done that, because of how much was taken out of the education system through Act 388, and also how much of the burden was, additional burden was placed on businesses. Because of that, about $250 million annually, additional burden on businesses to support the school systems that came out of the reduction in homeowners' property taxes for schools. That hurts your employment base badly.
Anyone?
I agree.
Any from another point of view?
You can go to the other end of the spectrum. By the nature of the history of the state, we are now trying to fight our economic war with Ohio or North Carolina or Georgia, with 1/3 of our population, with 1/3 of our capacity tied behind our backs because of the quality of education in about 1/3 of the state. That's a focused economic issue that's solvable fairly quickly, as long as you get the right attitude. That has to take place. We've got vast capacity in secondary education that we probably don't need relative to the size of this state, but nobody will walk away from existing capacity. The funding of four-year colleges have been declining rapidly over the last 3 to 4 years, and now they're scrambling to do things to just keep that quality at the same level, because it's school by school, issue by issue, dollar by dollar, instead of a comprehensive strategy.
Okay, thank you. We'll stop it there. Come on right up here, sir. Say your name and please ask your question.
Good evening. My name is Pat Mason. And I was going to ask Darla, being from the rural side of South Carolina, are there anything beyond the macro things we've been talking about tonight that relate to something we could do for the rural side of South Carolina, the Lorises and the Denmarks and the McCormicks? Is there any tactical things that we could vision to create some momentum there, which is really the most downtrodden part of South Carolina?
Sure.
Thank you, Pat.
Yeah, I think there's some definite things we can do for those of us that live behind the pine curtain. Okay, we do. One of the missed opportunities or taken for granted economic engines in South Carolina, I think this will surprise people, agribusiness. When I say agribusiness, I'm talking about agriculture and forestry. I bet people be surprised. $30 billion industry in South Carolina. I think it's the second behind tourism. Huge. Well, it's been that for a long time. We are an agricultural state, but we have ignored it. We've taken it for granted. All of us behind that pine curtain, have not innovated or been creative in changing ways, but there are opportunities in agribusiness today that I think can be one of the focal points of the economic engine growth in the future of South Carolina, and that is in agribusiness.
That would seem like low-hanging fruit. And if I was a public policymaker in South Carolina, I would look at that. I mean, that's pretty hard to miss. How do you think that's been missed?
How has it been missed? Well, you said we couldn't be incendiary or inflammatory.
Come on, I take all that back.
Okay. It has been missed. It's a blinding glimpse of the obvious, and it is low-hanging fruit, in my view, and could do more to help, obviously, our rural areas. And there can be some policy changes, some structural changes. We have a department or an office Secretary of Agriculture who, in my view, has done an exceptionally fine job over these last years as we have been trying to focus through the Palmetto Institute on agribusiness as an economic engine and the kinds of policies that we could employ or implement to help incentivize. They need to be on the same par with tax incentives, with all the incentives that Boeing is and that other industry is. And it's not treated the same way. That's one thing. I would make the Department of Agriculture an economic development arm, or have an arm of economic development attached to the Department of Agriculture that would do the same kinds of things that the Department of Commerce does to incentivize companies to come in here, but we also have to incentivize the local people. We are working on that and to come up with some policy ideas, but I think that is a major, but agriculture has got to be treated like you and like all the other businesses.
You know, I want to ask Secretary Joe Taylor how you feel about having agriculture under commerce, but I'm sure you probably don't want to talk about
that. That was not my suggestion.
Be clear about that.
Notwithstanding
Harris,
how much I like commerce.
Darla talks about this, and it's a bit uncomfortable to be so forthright about what we really need to do. What do you do we need to feel more pain? Is that going to make us look at some of these things like the agribusiness or some of the more obvious things, or actually push this this talk of comprehensive tax? Is it about pain? Are we incented by pain?
Well, I would hope with our unemployment rate where it is today that there's a fair amount of pain that's being brought to bear. It certainly is on that 11.8% of the people that are having difficulty feeding their families. So if we can't step up and do things with the kind of pain we're feeling today, we need to make some fundamental changes about who's feeling the pain. But, you know, one of the things that Darla was talking about in the question about rural South Carolina, I think one of the biggest issues we face in rural South Carolina is the educational system. We have an educational system, whether we want to admit it or not, is still a dual educational system. It may not be black and white, but it's have and have-nots. And all you have to do is ride down the I-95 corridor and you see firsthand what we're talking about with that. And you look at the schools, and until we improve the perception of education in South Carolina, it is going to be increasingly difficult for those that do business in South Carolina to recruit the kind of talent that we need to grow our businesses. And I think it's going to be very difficult for Mr. Taylor to recruit industry to South Carolina because people are going to need to want to live here. And so I think education is at the foremost of what we need to be focusing on from a development standpoint.
Is Barry Russell here from the Technical College System? I thought I saw his name. Yes, sir. If you'll say your name, please stand up.
Jim Reynolds. We've talked about education and workforce development being a key. I'd like to ask Ed to address some of the strategies that are in place, whether personal pathways or two-year college or endowed chairs or the clusters that are being stood up. And what are those strategies that in South Carolina we need to be supporting?
That's a shill in your audience there, Chris. He did.
No, that's not true.
In full disclosure, he is one of the co-chairs, along with Don Harriet, of the Workforce Education Task Force under New Carolina, and George Fletcher sitting next to him. What he's talking about is you have to make choices. You have to choose to invest in focused things, like they've done in education, Educational Development Act, Middle College, which is one of the most successful programs in this state, run by technical college campuses to save high school kids. They beg for money across the state on a program-by-program basis with no state funding at all. Inside agriculture, what we don't like to do in this state is choose. We don't like to choose who we might think could be a winner, because by choosing we leave someone out. And I think if you follow the debates in the legislature, what winds up happening is that we distribute our resources so everybody gets a piece and we never get the focus. And what Jim's talking about is we've got a nuclear cluster going. We think we can serve the world, not just North and South Carolina, but we can train the workforce for the world in nuclear clusters. There's an engineer up in Leo Stogner in Greenville, who single-handedly has organized the 2,000 engineers that are in Greenville to act as a group, as an occupational cluster, to make that place attractive. We've got more research scientists in Greenville than most cities in the Southeast, and we don't know that. We don't celebrate that. So it's about getting a focus going, but focus means you don't do something else. And that's what New Carolina's trying to do. You have to choose who you think are going to be winners. There's a philosophy in this state that the free market should do that and government shouldn't be involved in that role. And I think that's a terrible misleading point of view.
Well, to follow up on that point, Ed, then who's the alpha? Who makes the call? Who makes the decision? Who leads?
Well, I can tell you how they do it in North Carolina. You get a bunch of people in the room that are of goodwill. They represent various sectors, for example, in workforce development. You get a 25 to 50 person group. They just fight like cats and dogs, and then they come to a list, and then they back the list for the next months or years. You have the fight and you do it. It has to be a combination of leadership at state government, leadership at the business community, including entrepreneurism. You get in the room, but you have the discussion in a focused way. You involve everybody, but you can't allow folks to say, my choice wasn't picked, and therefore I'm going to destroy the common good because I didn't get my piece out of it.
Okay.
That's the danger.
I formally take back that non-inflammatory, non-incendiary comment. Thank you. Bill, weighed in on this.
Well, you probably asked somebody that probably has got the most positive experience from our company's standpoint. You know, in some respects, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing in that we've announced plans to build these plants. We're moving forward. We're under construction right now. Everybody's working hard to get on our bandwagon. So Tech Ed has come right in and tell us the programs you need, tell us how we help, tell us what we can do, and it's that way through the state government, which is what makes this such a great place to have a business or to grow a business or to bring a business. What we're really talking about here is creating conditions where we have a fertile ground, so to speak, rather than the resources being applied to businesses that are kind of off on their own agenda with their own growth pattern. It's hard to say anything negative about our Tech Ed system because we get a lot of really quality people out of it that come to work at our company. Our linemen, most of our linemen are two-year tech school graduates. They have to be. The support we're getting on the nuclear side is incredible. So I think the world is rife with stories of whether it's Bosch in Charleston or others who have come here where we've just sort of gotten folks really ready to work about the time the factory was ready. It's getting a broader group of people trained so we maybe don't have to do as much focused training when somebody shows up.
I want to keep this going. I'm going to ask you the last question on that. In the meantime, if we have a couple people in the back, I think, right up here. If you'll, sir, whoever's first, step to the edge here. Harris, I want to come back to something that Ed had alluded to, and I'm not going to ask the question right, but I think you'll understand what I'm asking, is do we need to get folks in a room and just bang it out and not worry about being genteel or kind and just get to the point and work this issue out, whether it's education, whether it's comprehensive tax reform? Whatever that issue is that what it's? Is that the leadership we're talking about?
Chris, I think that the leadership of this state the legislature and the executive branch and business, to the extent that they should weigh in, ought to get together and decide on what are the top 4 or 5 priorities, that the most important things in this state, commit to it and get it done.
And again, who would be the lead on that?
Well, the governor's
Is that
office
business or-
obviously needs to be in it. The Speaker of the House needs to be in it. The leadership in the Senate needs to be in it, and some representatives from business. And I can think of some other constituencies that should be there as well. But I think get an agreement on what is important for the next year, 10 years of this state, and let's agree to get it done.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good point. Thank you. And thank you for your patience, sir, if you'll say your name.
Yes, I'm Mike Fitz with SC Biz News. A lot of people in South Carolina have been focused for years on getting the wages paid here up to the national average. We earn about 80 cents on the dollar, more or less. And
move out here, Mike, please.
Sure. Have we lost ground on that in the recession? We were already struggling to gain that ground to the national average. Have we lost ground in this recession? And what can we do coming out of it to possibly make up that gap we've been working on?
You know who you want to ask that?
I would start with Ed, and I know Darla would have an opinion from the Palmetto Institute, too.
Ed.
I think the wage issue, which we focus on, we focus on it because it's an easy one. You can calculate it. It's published. You can go look at it. But wage is a result of other things. You can't just go raise wages. If you go at states that have higher wages, if you dig down into the industries where that's true, what you find is they produce more goods and services than we do here per labor hour. And therefore they get paid more because they have higher automation, they have higher innovation, and they grow. Wages follow productivity. And getting higher productivity inside focus industries is hard work. You can't just get there by saying we have low wages, let's add a couple of bucks to our deal. In textiles, in Massachusetts, you might be surprised to know, there's still a thriving textile industry in Massachusetts. You walk in a textile plant in Massachusetts and there's nobody there. There's nobody there because they are at 50% higher productivity level than we are here, and guess what? So are their wages. So wages follow productivity, which follows strategy inside industries, and that's the issue. So getting the wage up is the right answer, but it's not the causality. And you have to, the causality is the hard work. We have to dig in industry, but in agriculture, we can get productivity in agriculture, but it has to be focused, it has to be high scale, it has to choose the right crops. I mean, Darla has become an expert on this as she is.
Do you see that
wages follow productivity.
Do you see that differently or the same?
No, I'd say it's definitely related to productivity, no question about that. And we are severely deficient in productivity, which is why we are at an 80% of the national average in our per capita income. But what we found, we have done a lot of work in the agribusiness sector, for example, studying it and seeing where we might make inroads. And in looking at that, we mapped the entire state of what all our agricultural assets are. And in doing that, we also looked at productivity levels as between not us and Massachusetts, but us and North Carolina and us and Georgia in agribusiness. We are significantly less productive.
Is that frustrating to see that?
Yes, of course it's frustrating. It's enlightening, and you start to drill down and see why is that. But when you start looking at your neighbor, and they are significantly better than you are, and you're doing virtually the same thing, you've got to step back and ask why. And ask why. And I think this is the whole purpose of your program here today. What does South Carolina have to do? And what we're talking about here. We have got to invest in ourselves differently.
Not more, but differently?
More money is not the answer, frankly, in anything. It is better spending of money, better focusing of your strategies. And the things that we need, we have gotten to in order to make an economy vibrant. And you can look at us versus North Carolina, us versus Georgia, and where those states, as a policy matter, have put their efforts, their money, their time, their energy as a state, and that will tell you the difference in spades.
Bill, you're chief executive. One of your jobs is allocating capital across the platform in SCANA. Do you agree with Darla on this? It's not about more money, but it's about being more strategic and more thoughtful about this?
I think it is. I think I would have added accountability for results to her list.
And what does that look like? What do you mean by that?
You know, we never sort of step back and add up, well, what did we really accomplish for this? For whatever reason, that kind of accounting doesn't exactly occur. So, you know, taking that as just a part of a normal business process, you obviously have to measure outcomes, but you also have to have a sense of what did you spend to get those outcomes? Was it worth it? Should we do more of it? Do we need to go do something else? I think that I agree. We've sort of talked around the edges of this.
Yeah.
Our state is in a competitive arena. Other states are out there trying to outrun our port, trying to, compete for Boeing, get industry to move from here. They're willing to put incentives in place to get industries to move there as opposed to coming here. So I think we need to accept the fact we're in a ball game, and we really need to get about deciding, are we really willing to play? Are we really willing to play? Are we willing to do the training? Are we willing to do the drills? Are we willing to commit the resources to be successful? We used to get $6 billion a year of new and expanded capital investment in our state annually. I think we're down to about a third or less of that number now. We've sort of gotten out of the game. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying that's what's happened. And it's not just Georgia, and it's not just North Carolina, it's not just Virginia, it's China. My take on a lot of the job salary issues here is the fact that so much of what we've had here in the way of jobs are jobs that are easily done in other nations who perhaps don't have the cost structure we do, the overheads associated with the work that gets done. So I think that on the one hand, where we are competitive, we're competing against really low wage places, not just states, but places. And on the other hand, the knowledge content of much of what we do here, which is what people really value, the knowledge jobs where people really make some money, they're not exactly here. They're other places. And both of those are not, they're not the end of the line. We certainly can address those things, but we need to have thoughtful analysis about how we do it.
I want to keep up with, if you can come right around here, we have somebody, and ma'am, please step out here while she's walking out here. I want to come back to this issue of leadership and kind of how that looks. Right out here, don't be shy. Your name, please?
I'm Courtney Herring, and I have a question about talent retention. I know South Carolinians pay taxes to fund our K-12 system, and also our South Carolina Lottery pays in part for college education here in South Carolina. What are we doing to make sure our investments in these students, they don't graduate from our great colleges and universities and leave the state? It's an issue of workforce development and talent retention, also talent attraction. If we want to recruit business, we need to have a viable workforce that is young and innovative. And I just want to know, what can we do, or what are some creative, innovative ideas to keep, you know, young professionals and those bright minds here for future business?
Courtney, are you a student?
I am not. I work at the Columbia Chamber of Commerce, but I was a student at Carolina.
Full disclosure. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you. Anyone? Harris? Darla?
Well, it goes back to what we're talking about, Chris. We've got to create the jobs for these people to stay here, otherwise they're going to go somewhere else. And it gets back to basically what we were talking about. One thing that I agree but disagree with Darla on is I don't know whether we need more money in these programs or not. Some of them probably do, some of them probably don't. But the truth of the matter is we don't have unlimited funds in South Carolina, which leads into what Ed is talking about. We have to focus those dollars, and some of the programs that we have probably need more dollars. And I view the lack of productivity in South Carolina versus what they have in Georgia and North Carolina as an opportunity. And if you figure out what it is you've got to do differently and focus on it, we will get more productive. We just have to focus on it, throw the dollars at it, and drive it, and we will do it. But it's got to be focused and committed to, with accountability, as Phil says.
And I want to come back to this issue about, you said in North Carolina, they'll get people in a room and they'll just argue it out. So, is this just about leadership? Is this about standing up, taking a hard hit, and saying, this is what we have to do. It's not fun and it's painful. Or am I just oversimplifying this?
I don't think you're oversimplifying it. I think you keep going to outcome statements versus what causes them. It is about leadership, and when things don't happen, it's like Bill just said. Bad things happen when you don't have good leadership. It's a truism. The issue is what creates the leadership. And if I take her question about retaining talent, segment the issue. What she's talking about? She's talking about bright 19, 20, 21, and 22-year-olds. What do they want to do? Well, we'll try to get them to come to work for our 3 companies. We can't absorb a bunch of them, but their first thing they want to do is start their own businesses. Well, we don't do a very good job in this state at a fertile ground, either for venture capital, for entrepreneurism, and to make that happen. George Fletcher started a thing in Charleston called the New Ideas for New Carolina. We've now up to 500 entrants for that, a 2-page business plan. If you win, we give you $5,000 and you can go try it. That's one of the first things that ever happened in this state, and it started in 2004, for God's sakes. It never happened before. So leadership is there, but leadership has to be supported by infrastructure that rewards it. And in this state, we dissipate our energy because he's led a great company. Blue Cross has now got 10,000 people here. By the way, half our revenue is from outside the state. We view that as foreign capital. It's right? It is. It's foreign capital.
I think you just identified part of the problem.
There you go. So he's
foreign.
It is foreign capital. It's Georgia.
That's right. I think that may be part of the attitude problem.
It's coming in. But those are individual things. We don't celebrate our successes. Create that excitement. We start a thing here, first in the United States. There's something called the Consortium for Enterprise Systems Management. IBM is investing $30 million in a center in downtown Columbia with USC, first of its nation, to train fundamental world-class mainframe operators, which are going to make a return back here. We got one article on it, and it just dissipated into the dust. And that's going to create economic opportunity. We would rather celebrate the negative than the positive. So leadership is about a whole bunch of other stuff. It's not just about the 4 of us grabbing a flag saying, follow me up the hill. It's more complicated than that.
Darla, you know a little bit about capital allocation, return on investment. I think you get that. To Courtney's question about keeping some of those bright kids who have great ideas that could carry the flag for South Carolina, what is it about putting enough finance out there for these kids to get a hold of it and to start this new ideas down in Charleston? Is that what it is?
That's a lot of it. That's a lot of it. But if you step back and talk about successes, let me talk a couple of successes that we've had here. And I give the universities credit for it. We used to lose our top students that would come out of the schools in South Carolina inevitably by enormous margin would go out of state to school, because the schools here, for the same thing, the opportunities in the schools here were not what they could get at Duke or Harvard or wherever they would go. And so we would lose before they even started to look for a job. They would already be lost to the state. And what has happened over the last 10 years is we have had a tremendous, in my opinion, improvement in the academic quality of the universities, in particular our big 3 research universities in the state. And we have data out of the governor's school, Harris, you got that data, where those kids that went to the governor's school for math and science in Hartsville, so many of them,
50% of them.
50% of them.
You go to South Carolina schools?
Now, right?
And 50% of them return to South Carolina to work.
Whereas if you looked at that 10 years ago,
you didn't have it.
You had 3 to stay here. So there are successes. That is your first sign of a first sign of success. If they want to stay here because the academic environment is rich enough for them, the top people, then they're looking for reasons to stay in South Carolina. Academic richness, but we've got to have job and career richness too.
Yes, come on right out here. Ask your name and your question, please.
I'm Brad Worthen, and over the last couple of decades in South Carolina, I've noticed that we can always get a bunch of smart people together in a room, but something I wonder about is, has the private sector leadership, the business leadership, done everything that it could, present company accepted? Has it, in the aggregate, done everything it could? Has it focused enough? Has it followed through enough? Has it insisted enough that the right things get done in South Carolina?
Thanks, Brad. Bill, you've been kind of quiet.
Not my normal state of affairs, but I think Brad's question is one that we all have to do a bit of introspection over. I will tell you, I've been doing this particular job now for 12 years, and the demands on my time today just to take care of the company are magnitudes more than they were 12 years ago. Time resources for people who lead large organizations, whether they're independent companies or major divisions, are immense today compared to what they were. And it's just hard for us to make the quality time to be with one another. If you get 12 diverse opinions in the room and you've got to hammer out a solution, that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of trust, it takes a lot of knowing, but it takes a lot of time. And all of us have been, all our companies have been shocked several times by the economy over the last 8 or 9 years, and we're struggling with that. We're struggling with foreign competition. We're struggling with issues on Wall Street. We're struggling with thousands of pages of new government regulations. Just trying to get all that done doesn't leave nearly the time that perhaps business leaders had 20 years ago to really spend the time to do this. Now, in some ways that's an excuse, but that's also a reality. Maybe if we were a little more purposeful with our time and willing to engage in the tough work, maybe better progress would have been made. I don't know the answer to that. I just know that there's no lack of desire on anyone's part sitting up here to really leave at the end of our careers this place a much better place than it was when we got here back in time.
It almost sounds like a little purge of the soul and a little confessional there, Bill. Is that what that is?
No, I don't. I'm just trying to put his comments in perspective. It is very different today. The business leaders in the state today, my perception is, we work together differently than they did a generation or two ago. I think part of it is a time issue. Part of it is we're pulled so many more different directions today than perhaps they were before. So maybe we need to figure out a new way to do it, a better way to do it.
Any follow-up, Darla?
On that, I think in defense of ourselves, or you guys, let me say.
Way to jump out the boat.
In defense of you guys, I think we can take...
She took the last helicopter out and left us here.
We can take the Boeing example as a testament to what we can do if we work together. That Boeing that worked over a span of time, so there were different players involved. It took lots of different groups of people, political, business, that was done through a collaboration of a lot of people in South Carolina from all walks of life, from all kinds of government, municipalities, counties, state. We can do it. We can do it. And I think Boeing is a perfect example of what we as business people, political people can do if we set our minds to something.
I think there's one other, agree. Another phenomenon that's taken place here. If you go back to when Bill was talking about even 15 years ago, I've been running Blue Cross for, been here 20 years, running it for 15, 16 years. If you look at what people want, who would select as a leader from the business community, they want to find people who run large things. That's an appealing thing to do. We have resources, we can write checks. But if you look at the scale of the companies and rank order by size, we've lost a large part of that leadership capacity that would flow from having a very large platform from which to be a leader. Mm-hmm. But we haven't, and that happens, that moves around. What we haven't done is substituted back in to draw in what I go around the state. There is a buckets full of bright young leaders of companies, but these companies are $10 million companies. They're $20 million companies. And we haven't found a way to engage them in statewide leadership when they got to make a living, because the smaller the company you can do it. You see